What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 1 of the Talk Juah podcast, where we dive deep into Bible stories and talk about what they mean to us today. The story we're discussing today is Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 33, which is the story of walking on water. I am the host, theological expert Jonathan Vasquez from the Air Force Academy. I'm here with
Esteban Nino from the University of Yale.
Matthew Hernandez from Johns Hopkins University.
And Garrett Pardo from Duke University.
And the questions we're going to be answering today is, how does this podcast relate to us today? And what does this mean to our faith? Let's get into it. Matt, would you start us off?
Sure thing, Johnny. This story happens right after Jesus feeds thousands of people, so the disciples have already seen something amazing. But this miracle is different. Here, Jesus walks on water in the middle of a storm. It's a sign of his power, not just to do miracles, but to control nature itself. For the disciples, this would have been mind-blowing. Jesus wasn't just a teacher. He was showing that he had power on a level only God would have.
Yeah, exactly. But there's more going on here than just power. Jesus tells the disciples to go on ahead of him while he prays. Then they get stuck in a storm. And Jesus walks out on the water to meet them. I think he's showing them, and us, something important about his presence. Even when they're scared and feel alone, he's there. He doesn't just calm the storm right away. He shows up right in the middle of it.
And I mean, look at how the disciples react. They're terrified. They think Jesus is a ghost. They know him, they trust him, but in that moment, fear just takes over them. I think that's pretty relatable for all of us. How often do we let fear get in the way of seeing Jesus in our own lives, especially when things are tough?
So what do you think Jesus wanted the disciples and us to learn from this moment? Is it mostly about showing that he's divine, or is it more about faith?
Well, Johnny, to be honest, I think it's both. Walking on water would have reminded the disciples of the Old Testament passages, like in Job, where it says God tramples the waves of the sea. Jesus is showing that he has authority over creation, just like God. But the way he goes out to them is also important. He's not distant. He meets them right where they are, even in their fear.
And I mean, look at Peter. He steps out onto the water towards Jesus, but then he gets distracted by the wind and waves and starts to sink. This shows that faith isn't just a belief, it's an action. Something you live out. When Peter keeps his eyes on Jesus, he's able to do the impossible. When he focuses on the storm, he sinks. I believe it's a reminder that in our own lives, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus, especially when things get hard.
Yeah, and especially the way Jesus responds when Peter starts sinking, it's amazing. He reaches out and saves him. Jesus doesn't scold Peter for doubting right away. He catches him. I think that says a lot about Jesus' grace. Even when we doubt or get scared, he's there to help us at all times.
So how can the story impact our faith today, especially when we are facing tough situations?
Well, Johnny, one big takeaway is that faith isn't about having all the answers or being totally fearless. Peter had doubts, and he sank. But Jesus didn't leave him. He reached out and saved him. Faith isn't about being perfect. It's about trusting that Jesus will be there even when we struggle.
Right. Faith isn't just a set of beliefs, it's a relationship that you build. Jesus calls Peter to step out, to trust him even in a storm. And life today can feel stormy too, with everything from personal struggles to things like climate change or economic worries. This story challenges us to keep our focus on Jesus, knowing that he is with us in the middle of the chaos.
Exactly, Matthew. That's a great point. And the story also shows us that it's okay to have doubts. Jesus doesn't abandon Peter when he gets scared. I think that's comforting because it means faith doesn't have to be perfect. We might mess up or get scared, but Jesus is right there with us, even in those moments.
This story brings up some big questions about faith, healing, and belief. Do you think this miracle teaches us anything about healing or about how faith works in real life?
Good question. I think the miracle isn't just about keeping the disciples safe, it's about showing them a deeper kind of peace. Jesus doesn't calm the storm right away. First, he walks out to them right into the middle of the storm. This teaches us that faith in Jesus doesn't mean everything will be easy. It means he'll be with us even in hard times.
Yeah, Matt, exactly. When Jesus pulls Peter back up, he's not just saving him from drowning. He's restoring his confidence. Jesus doesn't just stop the storm and say, problem solved. Instead, he's helping Peter grow in faith. This miracle isn't just about an outward change in the weather. It's about an inner change in the disciples themselves.
And that change is really key. This story shows that faith and healing go hand in hand with each other. Faith isn't about being safe in a boat. It's about being close to Jesus, even when we're afraid. Faith is trusting Jesus enough to step out, even when we might sink. Healing comes from knowing he's with us.
Thank you all for such great insights about this miracle. It's really good to think of faith as this deep connection with Jesus, one that weathers storms and doubts. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts for our listeners?
Yes. I'd say remember that faith sometimes feels risky, but it's in those times that we really discover who Jesus is and who we are with him.
Yeah, and also remember that Jesus is there even when we doubt. Faith isn't about having it all together. It's about reaching out to the one who does.
And don't be afraid of the storms. Jesus is often closer than we realize in those times. Keep your eyes on him, even when things get tough. He's the one who brings peace.
Well, that concludes today's episode of Talk Juah, episode 1. Big thanks to Matthew, Esteban, and Garrett from their respective colleges. This was an awesome discussion for our listeners, especially episode 1. Thank you to y'all. A little round of applause. This concludes our episode. I hope y'all had an amazing time listening to us talk.